Carlos Alcaraz renounces Spain. His new coach reveals the plan for the Mercian tennis player in the first part of the year, which does not include the Davis Cup tie that the Spanish team will play in Switzerland. Carlos Alcaraz continues to offer hints about how he is handling his preseason. Amid the ongoing debate about whether he should have played the matches in the US 2 weeks ago and if the preseason timing he has set is ideal for reaching the Australian Open 2025 in peak condition, both the Mercian tennis player and his team have made it clear that everything is carefully planned. Preseason mode activated, Carlos Alcaraz himself posted this week, alongside an image showing him being observed by his physical trainer, Alberto Yeto. The Spanish tennis player knows that in the 3 weeks before heading to Australia in early January, he needs to build the physical foundation for the demanding season ahead. The vacation and Caribbean trip are now behind him, and he is taking charge of his preparation very close to home, at the Real Sociedad Club de Campo in Murcia. His planning is so meticulous that his new coach revealed his calendar and who will accompany him at each stage in an interview with Punto Break. Juan Carlos Ferrero will start the year in Australia, then I will take over in Rotterdam and, I believe, Dubai. After that, they'll head to Indian Wells and Miami. When the clay court season begins, I'll take over again, but, for example, in tournaments like Barcelona or Madrid, we'll likely share responsibilities. I'll begin the American Tour, and Juan Carlos will join me at the US Open. For the Asian Tour, we'll split a couple of tournaments each. I have everything more or less planned in my head, said Samuel Lopez, the former coach of Pablo Carreño. Alcaraz skips from the Australian Open to Rotterdam. This initial season forecast does not include a key event for Spain. The Spanish team will face Switzerland on February 1st to 2nd, likely in Biel. This will be the first of 2 rounds required to qualify for the Davis Cup finals this year. There's still a long way to go, and David Ferrer will consult with players in Australia before finalizing the team. However, Ferrer already knows that Alcaraz has not included the Davis Cup in his plan. The tie takes place at a particularly tricky time. It falls in the week after the Australian Open and the week before the Rotterdam tournament. If Alcaraz were to play in the Davis Cup and perform well in these 2 tournaments, he would be competing non-stop for a month. Then, after a 1-week break, he'd face the Dubai Duty-Free Tennis Championships in the UAE. Following another short rest, he would begin a grueling 4-week stretch at the season's first 2 North American Masters 1000 events, preceded by a scheduled match in Puerto Rico. The only advantage that might persuade him is that the Davis Cup will be played on an indoor hard court in Switzerland. If they agree to ease his workload, the tie could serve as preparation for the Rotterdam tournament, which is also played indoors. Convincing him of this will fall to David Ferrer, though the circumstances appear unfavorable. Carlos Alcaraz is no longer the best player in the world, according to Alexander Zverev. Alexander Zverev has long said that Carlos Alcaraz is the best player in the world. As recently as September during the Laver Cup, when they shared a team, he reiterated this sentiment. However, the German seems to have changed his opinion and recently stated in an interview that Jannik Sinner now deserves that title. Zverev was the closest rival to Alcaraz and Sinner in 2024, reaching the Roland Garros final, winning Masters 1000 titles at the Rome Open and the Paris Masters, and making several semifinals in major tournaments, including Miami, Cincinnati, the Australian Open, and the ATP Finals. I've known him since he was a kid. Italian Jannik Sinner finished the year as the undeniable world number 1, with an outstanding season tallying 73 wins and only 6 losses, along with 8 titles, including his first Grand Slam wins at the Australian Open and the US Open, as well as 3 Masters 1000 titles. In contrast, Alcaraz claimed 4 titles, including the Channel Slam with victories at Roland Garros and Wimbledon. Sinner's dominance in 2024 faced one major obstacle: his biggest rival to date, Alcaraz. The Spaniard won all 3 encounters between the two this season, handing Sinner half of his 6 total losses in 2024. First, Alcaraz triumphed in the Indian Wells semifinals in March, 1-6, 6-3, 6-2. 2 months later, Alcaraz defeated Sinner in the Roland Garros semifinals, 2-6, 6-3, 3-6, 6-4, 6-3, on his way to winning the French Open. Finally, Alcaraz bested Sinner in the Beijing Open final, avenging his semifinal loss to him in the same tournament the previous year. In a recent interview with Tennis Magazine, Alexander Zverev reflected on the incredible seasons of Sinner and Alcaraz. After closely observing both players, he chose the Italian as the current world number 1. I've known Sinner since he was 16 or 17. He trained with Riccardo Piatti near Monte Carlo. Whenever I trained there, we'd go because they had a court available. So I've known him since he was a kid at the academy, Zverev recalled. From a tennis perspective, he deserves to be number one in the world. He's won 2 Grand Slams, 3 Masters, and the ATP Finals. He's the best player in the world, the one with the most titles. Carlos is someone I get along with very well. We've shared special moments, playing the most important matches against each other on the court and spending time together off it. Every time we've played, and every match we've played this year, it's been at a very high level with plenty of spectacle, and it's fun to be on the court with him, Zverev said. Carlos Alcaraz and an offer he couldn't refuse. Juan Carlos Ferrero has found it increasingly challenging to coach the Mercian and has turned to Samuel Lopez for assistance. Lopez shared his initial impressions of working with the best Spanish tennis player of the moment. At the peak of success, others might try to claim all the glory for themselves, but Juan Carlos Ferrero has opted to share the workload to avoid burnout and continue savoring success at the right pace. The Valencian has admitted that he needed help to keep guiding Carlos Alcaraz, both in terms of time and methodology. For that, he used his lifeline and called someone he knew would say, "Yes, I'd love to," Samuel Lopez. After a few weeks working as an official member of Alcaraz's coaching team, Lopez has spoken to Punto Break about this major change in his life at 54 years old. Parting ways with Pablo Carreño after so many years and helping him become a top 10 player was incredibly tough. The week before I told him was really hard. Just as hard as the 2 weeks after. I felt strange. We've shared so many years and emotions, and we both have so many memories together. Once I started working with Juan Carlos Ferrero and Carlos Alcaraz, I began to focus on my new objectives and gradually got into the role. Despite the difficulty of the decision, he had no choice but to take it. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. What led me to switch projects was a conversation with Juan Carlos. His idea for the past 2 years was for me to join the team at some point. Even Pablo knew this. That idea was on hold as long as I stayed with Pablo, but I knew Juan Carlos would ask me to join them sooner or later. I had everything planned to continue 1 more year with Pablo, but at the last moment, plans changed. There was only a brief moment of doubt, but it didn't last long. During the second week of preseason with Pablo, we had already started, but that Monday, Juan Carlos told me it was time. They needed to add someone to the team. I wasn't expecting it. At that moment, I did have doubts and needed to think it over, but I knew this opportunity was crucial for my future. It meant taking a step forward in my coaching career. I couldn't let this chance slip by because if I didn't join, someone else would. At least he received the response he hoped for from Pablo Carreño. I couldn't tell him something like this over the phone. If I found out on a Tuesday, I went to Barcelona on Thursday to talk to him. The first thing we addressed was this conversation. It was very difficult to say. I could barely finish my sentences because of the emotion. I can only thank him for the way he reacted because he didn't see it coming either. He was a bit taken aback but understood. Pablo told me to stay calm and that he would have done the same in my position. Lastly, regarding Ferrero's decision, Lopez speaks from experience. The years have added up, more trips, more stress. A lot of responsibility falls on the coach, so having the support of a second voice is important. It's a role that can bring freshness, especially now that Carlos is maturing and starting to make some decisions himself. It requires total mental focus, and everyone needs to stay fresh. If Juan Carlos